The call came on a Tuesday, a day that had, until that moment, been utterly unremarkable. I was in the kitchen, wiping down a counter that was already clean, the scent of lemon polish hanging in the still afternoon air. When I picked up the phone to ask my son Max when the wedding would finally be, it was his new wife Lena who answered. Her voice, usually a sweet, cloying melody she reserved for when she needed something, was different. It was sharp, brittle, like ice cracking under pressure. She looked me right in the eye through the video call, a chilling little smile playing on her lips, and said the words that would detonate the foundations of my world. "Oh, we already got married yesterday, Renate. We only invited special people." The words didn't just hit me, they saturated me, a sudden, brutal baptism in ice water. Special people. The phrase echoed in the cavernous space that had just opened up inside my chest. Special people. And I, it seemed, was not one of them. I, who for 3 years, a total of 1,095 days, had paid their monthly rent of $500 without fail. I, who had bought every single piece of furniture that filled their small apartment, from the sofa they lounged on to the bed they slept in. I, who had filled their refrigerator more times than I could count, driving groceries to their door when they had nothing to eat, my own pantry often looking sparse in comparison. I, who had co-signed for the car Max drove, a car he never once offered to drive me in. I was not a special person. I stood there in the living room of my own house, the house where I had raised him, holding the phone as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. I watched my son, my only child, my Max, meticulously avoid my gaze while Lena, his wife of one day, made herself comfortable on the sofa I had bought for them just last Christmas. That sofa, a soft gray chenille, had cost me nearly $1,000, money I had taken from the savings my late husband, Robert, had left for me. He had told me it was for my peace, for my comfort in my twilight years, and I had spent it on their comfort instead. The dress, a pale, dusty rose silk, hung uselessly in my closet. It was a beautiful dress, elegant and understated. I had spent $200 on it, a significant indulgence for me, imagining how proud I would look in the wedding photos in which I would now never appear. The new shoes were still in their box, the tissue paper pristine. The illusion of being a cherished part of the most important day of my only son's life that was shattered beyond repair, lying in glittering shards around my feet. For weeks, for months, I had been in a state of joyful anticipation. I had planned every detail of my role. I had carefully put aside $1,000 in crisp new bills to give them as a wedding gift. I had called my sister Diana all the way in Chicago, my voice trembling with happiness as I told her the good news that Max was finally settling down. I had cleaned my entire house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors and washing windows, thinking they might come to celebrate with me after the ceremony, perhaps a small, intimate dinner. All of it, every dream, every quiet hope, every loving gesture, collapsed in a single brutal second with those 4 poisoned words, "Only special people." Max finally lifted his gaze. His eyes, the same deep brown eyes I had gazed into when he was a baby, were flat, rehearsed. "Mom," he began, his voice a monotone. "It was just an intimate thing, very small. Just the 2 of us and the witnesses. But I knew it was a lie. The lie was as loud as a scream in the silent room. Because I had seen the photos. Just before I called, a notification had popped up on my social media feed. I saw Lena's parents, beaming with pride, posing on either side of the bride and groom. I saw her siblings, raising champagne flutes in a toast. I saw at least 30 other guests, all smiling, all celebrating, all special. I saw Lena's white dress, a cascade of lace and satin, a dress I now realized I had helped finance with the $800 I had given her just last month for what she had vaguely termed personal expenses. I saw everything I was not supposed to see. I saw the wedding I was not special enough to attend. The call ended. I don't remember who hung up. I just remember the silence that followed, a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. That night, sleep was a stranger. I sat on my bed and looked around the quiet house, a museum of my life, of my love for my son. Every corner held a memory, every object a story. And all I could think about was how I had poured my entire existence into a vessel that was not just cracked, but deliberately broken, A week passed. Exactly 7 days. 7 days of silence from them. 7 days of me replaying that conversation, that look on my son's face, over and over in my mind. Then, Lena called. Her voice was completely different. The icy confidence was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading tone I knew all too well. It was the voice she used when the rent was due. "Renate," she began, her voice trembling just slightly, a carefully calibrated performance of distress. "The rent is overdue. The landlord is pressuring us. He says if we don't pay by the end of this week, he'll start eviction proceedings. You forgot to make the transfer. Forgot." As if it were a chore I had simply overlooked, like forgetting to buy milk. I was silent for a few seconds, letting the weight of her audacity settle. I remembered all the times I had rushed to the bank on the last day of the month, my own heart pounding with anxiety on their behalf. All the times I had canceled plans with my own friends, my sister, to make sure they had a roof over their heads. All the times I had eaten simple meals, beans on toast, rice and vegetables, so that I could give them the money for their desires, for dinners out, for new clothes, for the life they felt they were entitled to. And now, after they had surgically removed me from the most significant moment of their lives, they had the gall, the absolute breathtaking nerve to call me as if nothing had happened, as if I were still their compliant, ever-present safety net. "Lena," I said, and the calmness in my own voice surprised me. It was a cold, clear calm, like a frozen lake. "Didn't I warn you that I only help special people?" The silence on the other end of the line was so deep, so absolute, that I could hear the slow, steady beat of my own heart. For the first time in years, it was not I who was trembling, it was her. "Renate, I don't understand," she stammered, the performance crumbling. "We were always special to you. You're like a second mom to me." Lies. All of it. A thick, suffocating blanket of lies. Wrapped in that sweet voice she only ever used when she needed something. The same voice she had used to ask me for money for the wedding dress, for the honeymoon they were planning, for the rings. Rings I had helped finance without knowing I would never see the ceremony where they were exchanged. For so many years I had walked on eggshells around them, a constant low-grade anxiety humming beneath my skin. I weighed every word, every gesture, every gift, hoping to earn a crumb of affection, a moment of genuine connection with my own son. I was the perfect mother, the obliging mother-in-law, the silent provider who never protested, who never demanded anything in return, who never made waves when they treated me as if I were invisible, a piece of furniture in the background of their lives. But that phrase, "only special people," had awakened something in me, something that had been dormant for far too long. A core of steel I had inherited from my own mother, a resilience forged in the lonely years after Robert's passing. That night, after I hung up on Lena's sputtering protests, I sat at my dining room table, the same table where Robert and I used to plan our future, and I began to calculate. I needed to see it in black and white. I needed to quantify my own foolishness. The rent, $500 a month, multiplied by 36 months. $18,000. Food and supplies, a conservative estimate of $200 a month, another $7,200. Birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, anniversary gifts, just because gifts, at least $3,000. Lena's so-called medical emergencies, which always seemed to coincide with a sale at her favorite boutique, $800, the car loan they never paid me back a single dime on, $2,500, the air conditioner repair in their apartment last summer, $600, the living room furniture, the sofa, the coffee table, the bookshelf, $1,200. The total stared back at me from the notepad, a stark, brutal number. $33,400, that was the precise sum of my generosity. $33,400 I had taken from my retirement, from my savings, from the money my dear husband had worked his entire life to leave me, so that I could live my last years in peace and dignity. And what was it all for? To be treated like a stranger, an inconvenience, on my own son's wedding day, to be deemed not special. That night I sat on my bed and I cried. But they were not tears of sadness or self-pity. They were tears of rage. A hot, cleansing fire of accumulated frustration, of years of silently endured humiliation. I cried for all the times they had made me feel that my love was a burden, my presence an obligation, my money the only thing I had to offer that was of any value to them. I cried for the foolish, hopeful mother I had been. I cried for the woman who had lost herself, trying to be indispensable to those who considered her disposable. And when I woke up the next morning, as the first pale rays of dawn crept through my window, something inside me had fundamentally shifted. The pain of betrayal was still there, a dull ache beneath my ribs, but it was overshadowed by something else, something deeper, colder, and far more powerful, a resolve as hard as granite. I stood up and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The same tired eyes looked back at me, the same wrinkles that told the story of years of giving love without expecting it back. But there was something new in my gaze, a hardness I didn't recognize, a determination that had been buried under years of compliance and a desperate need to be loved. I went to the kitchen and made coffee, just as I had every morning for 40 years. But this time, I didn't think about calling Max to ask how he had slept. I didn't check my phone with a flicker of pathetic hope, anticipating a message from him apologizing for the humiliation. For the first time in a very, very long time, I was my own first concern of the day. And my first order of business was to burn their world to the ground, a world I had so foolishly built for them. I sat at the table where I had so often planned surprises for them, counted out bills for their expenses, and cried silently when they treated me with indifference. Now, this table would be the war room for my own liberation. The phone rang, and I saw Max's name flash on the screen. Normally, my heart would have leaped into my throat, a Pavlovian response of hope and anxiety. I would have run to answer it, praying he would finally apologize, that he would explain that everything had been a terrible misunderstanding. But this time, I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, it fell silent. I continued to drink my coffee, the rich, dark liquid a balm to my raw nerves. I savored the silence as if it were the most beautiful music. 10 minutes later, it rang again. This time, it was Lena. I let it ring too. Then, a text message from Max. The words were a caricature of concern. "Mom, please answer. We need to talk." I deleted the message without replying. A strange sense of power washed over me. The power of silence. The power of refusal. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I decided to go for a walk. I hadn't done that in months without a specific purpose, without an errand related to them. It was always a trip to the bank for their transfers, a run to the supermarket to buy them something they needed, a visit to the pharmacy for Lena's latest ailment. Today, I went for a walk simply because I wanted to, because the sun was shining and the air was crisp. I walked past the park where I had so often taken Max as a child, his small hand tucked firmly in mine. I remembered that sweet, laughing boy who would hug me so tight I could barely breathe and tell me I was the best mom in the world. When had he become this man, this stranger who treated me like an ATM with feelings? When had I started confusing love with money? When had I begun to believe that I had to buy my own son's affection? My walk led me, perhaps inevitably, to the bank. The same branch where I had so often made the automatic transfers that fueled their lifestyle. The branch manager, a kind man named Mr. Klein, saw me through the large glass window and waved. I had known him for years. He had processed every single one of my transfers to Max and Lena. He had watched, month after month, year after year, as my account drained to fill theirs. He had always been professional, but I had sometimes caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Concern? Pity? I went inside, the cool air conditioning a sharp contrast to the turmoil in my heart, and walked directly to his office. He stood up to greet me, his face etched with professional courtesy. "Mrs. Richter, how can I help you today?" I took a deep breath, my voice steady and clear. "Mr. Klein," I told him, "I need to cancel the automatic transfers I have programmed." He looked at me, genuinely surprised. For 3 years, these transfers had been as regular as the sunrise. "Are you sure, Mrs. Richter? Did something happen?" His concern was genuine, more genuine than any interest Max had shown in me in recent months. A lump formed in my throat, but I swallowed it down. "What happened, Mr. Klein?" I replied, meeting his gaze directly, "is that I finally opened my eyes. I want to cancel everything, and I also want information on how to protect my accounts. I don't want anyone else to have access to my money, ever again." While Mr. Klein processed the cancellations, his fingers flying across the keyboard with quiet efficiency. My phone, which I had placed on his desk, began to vibrate incessantly. Max, Lena, Max again. It was as if they had developed a sixth sense, a radar to detect when their primary source of income was in mortal danger. I reached over and turned the phone off completely. The silence that followed was blissful. "Mrs. Richter," Mr. Klein said softly as he handed me the confirmation papers to sign. He hesitated for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. "I apologize for intruding, but in all these years, I have seen you be incredibly generous with your family. I just hope you are not being pressured to make these changes." His words touched me deeply, a small act of human kindness from an unexpected quarter. This man, who barely knew me beyond our bank transactions, showed more genuine concern for my well-being than my own flesh and blood. "I'm not being pressured, Mr. Klein," I said, a small, sad smile touching my lips. "On the contrary, I have finally stopped pressuring myself." When I left the bank, I felt strangely light, as if I had left an enormous, crushing burden in that office. For the first time in years, my money was entirely my own. I had no financial obligations to people who saw me as a resource instead of a person. My future was my own to plan, my savings were my own to spend, or to save as I saw fit. I went home and thought about all the things I had not done to please Max and Lena, the trips I had not taken to save money for their emergencies, the friends I no longer saw because I was always on call for their manufactured crises, the hobbies I had given up, the painting classes I had canceled, because every dollar I spent on myself felt like a dollar I was stealing from their needs. When I got home, I saw them. 3 cars parked in front of my door. Max's sedan, Lena's little hatchback, and one I didn't recognize, a sleek, dark European model that screamed expensive lawyer. I could see movement inside my house through the front windows. My blood ran cold. They had keys. Of course they had keys. I had given them a set years ago, in a fit of maternal trust, thinking that one day they would be the ones to use them to take care of me, just as I had always taken care of them. The irony was a bitter pill. I took a deep, steadying breath before walking up my own garden path. It was time. It was time for the first real confrontation of my new life. I opened the door to my house and walked into a scene I will never forget. It was a tableau of entitlement and panic. Max was sitting on my sofa, the one Robert had loved, with his head in his hands, a picture of manufactured despair. Lena was pacing back and forth in front of the fireplace like a caged animal, her movements sharp and agitated, and an older man I didn't know, impeccably dressed in a gray suit, was going through a stack of papers on my dining room table. My papers, my personal documents, my bank statements, my will. "What is happening here?" I asked. My voice did not tremble. It was louder, stronger than I had expected, echoing in the suddenly silent room. All 3 of them looked at me as if I were the intruder, as if I had violated their space in my own home. Lena was the first to speak, her voice laced with that desperate urgency I had already heard on the phone. "Renate, thank God you're here. We need to talk. Mr. Fisher here is from the law firm we consulted about your situation." "My situation?" The question came out of my mouth with a calm that surprised even me. "What situation? I'm doing perfectly fine." Max finally lifted his head, and I saw his eyes. The innocent child was gone forever. Now, they only reflected a deep, primal financial panic. "Mom, we went to the bank. They told us you canceled all the transfers. Mr. Klein explained that you also blocked our access to your accounts. We don't understand why you did that." Mr. Fisher, the lawyer, a man probably in his late 50s with a smile that didn't reach his cold, assessing eyes, approached me with an outstretched hand, a gesture of false camaraderie. "Mrs. Richter, I am Dr. Fisher, a family law attorney. Your children are concerned about your mental well-being and have asked me to assess the situation." I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I walked directly to my dining table and gathered all my documents that he had been reviewing without my permission, stacking them into a neat pile. "These are my private papers. You have no right to look at them without my consent." "Mom," Max interjected, and his voice dripped with a condescending tone he had perfected in recent years, a tone reserved for when he thought I was being difficult or irrational. "We're worried about you. Your behavior has been very strange lately. First, you cut us off financially without any explanation. Then, you don't answer our calls. We think you might need professional help." Lena rushed to my side, her face a mask of counterfeit tenderness, and tried to take my hand. "Renate, honey, we know you're under a lot of stress. Maybe the loneliness is affecting you more than you think. At your age, episodes of confusion are perfectly normal." Confusion. The word echoed in my head like an alarm bell, and in that instant, I understood everything. Their entire strategy was laid bare. This wasn't about helping me. This was about declaring me mentally incompetent so they could seize control of my finances. The same woman who had told me, just 1 week ago, that they only invited special people to their wedding was now treating me like a senile old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own checkbook. "I am not confused," I said, and my voice was like steel, silencing everyone in the room. "In fact, I am clearer than I have been in years, and you are all going to leave my house, right now." "Mr." Fisher interjected with that smooth, professional voice that lawyers use when they want to sound reasonable while delivering a threat. "Mrs. Richter, I understand you feel overwhelmed. But your children have a legal right, and some might say a moral duty, to intervene if they believe your ability to make sound financial decisions is impaired. They have documented several concerning behaviors." Concerning behaviors. The laugh that escaped my throat was harsh, guttural, almost cruel. Like what? Deciding that my money belongs to me? Deciding to no longer finance the lives of 2 able-bodied adults who treat me like dirt? Lena jumped as if I had slapped her. "We never treated you badly. You are part of our family. Everything you have will belong to us one day anyway. We are just speeding up the process." There it was, the naked, unvarnished truth, stripped of all pretense. Everything I had would one day belong to them. In their minds, I was already dead. I was a ghost haunting my own assets, and they were simply the impatient heirs, trying to collect their inheritance in advance. It didn't matter if I had 20 years or 20 days left to live. To them, I was just an ATM with legs that had suddenly become problematic. "Out," I said, my voice low and dangerous, pointing a trembling finger toward the door. "All 3 of you. Get out of my house." Max stood up, his face contorted into that angry, childlike pout he made when he didn't get his way. "Mom, we can't just leave. We have obligations. The rent, the car payments, the credit card you co-signed for. You can't just cut us off from one day to the next." "I can't?" My voice rose for the first time in the entire conversation, filled with the fire of 3 years of repressed anger. "Who says I can't? For years, I have paid rent on an apartment that wasn't even in my name. I filled a refrigerator in a house where I was not welcome. I financed a life that clearly had no place for me. I can, and I will." Mr. Fisher took a pristine white folder from his leather briefcase and placed it on my table with an air of finality. "Mrs. Richter, we have prepared some documents that could facilitate this transition. A durable power of attorney that would allow Max and Lena to manage your finances more efficiently. This would just be a temporary measure, of course. Until you feel better." I took the folder. I felt its weight in my hand, the weight of their greed, their betrayal. And without even opening it, I walked over to the kitchen trash can and dropped it directly inside. The sound it made was immensely satisfying. "The only transition that is going to happen here," I said, turning to face them, "is yours, to the other side of that front door." Lena started to cry then, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pure frustration, of contained, impotent rage. "You can't do this to us, Renate. We were counting on you. We made plans based on your support. We bought things. We took on financial obligations because we always knew, we could count on you." "Obligations based on my money," I replied, my voice cold. "Not on my well-being, not on my happiness, not on my company, just on my money. And now that I have decided that my money is better used in my own life, I am suddenly a confused old woman who needs a legal guardian." Max tried to approach me then, his hands outstretched in a placating gesture. "Mom, we made mistakes," he said, his voice attempting a remorseful tone that sounded utterly false. "The wedding. It was a misunderstanding. Lena was nervous. I was under a lot of pressure. We can fix this. We can fix this if you just become reasonable again." "Reasonable." The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Being reasonable means continuing to pay for your life while you treat me like a stranger? It means pretending it doesn't hurt to have been excluded from the most important day of my only son's life? No, Max. That is not reasonable. That is madness. Mr. Fisher began to pack his papers with the brisk efficiency of someone who is used to having proposals rejected but is already planning the next line of attack. Mrs. Richter, this is not over. Your family has legal options. If you are indeed making irrational decisions due to a decline in your mental health, a judge can determine that you need a guardianship. His words were a direct blow. I realized this was not just a manipulative family visit. It was a real, calculated legal threat. They were prepared to drag me through the court system, to humiliate me publicly, to strip me of my autonomy, all for money. Mr. Fisher, I said, looking him directly in the eyes, my gaze unwavering, I suggest you do your research more thoroughly before you threaten a 71-year-old woman who has managed her finances flawlessly for over 40 years. A woman who raised her son alone after the death of her husband. A woman who ran a household and worked an honorable job until her retirement. And a woman who, until last week, was financially supporting two completely capable adults. You bring this to a judge and I will bring my receipts. Lena stopped crying and looked at me with a coldness that finally showed her true face. This won't stay like this, Renate. We have rights, and we have lawyers. Perfect, I replied, walking to the door and holding it open. Hire all the lawyers you want, with your own money, of course. Because as of today, mine is no longer available to finance your legal tantrums. The three of them walked to the door with the wounded dignity of people who are not used to being told no. Before he stepped out, Max turned to me one last time, his face a mixture of anger and panic. Mom, this is going to end very badly for you. You're going to end up alone, with no one to take care of you when you really need it. I looked at my son, the boy I had loved more than life itself, and felt a profound, bottomless sadness, but also a crystalline clarity. Max, I said, my voice soft but firm, I'm already alone. The difference is that now, it is by my own choice, not by your neglect. As I closed the door behind them, the solid click of the lock echoing in the hallway, I stood in my living room, surrounded by the most beautiful, peaceful silence I had heard in years. It was the silence of freedom. That night, I couldn't sleep. But it wasn't out of sadness or regret. It was out of adrenaline, the pure, thrumming energy of having reclaimed control of my own life. I lay awake in bed, not as a victim, but as a general preparing for a battle. If Max and Lena wanted to fight, I would give them a war. But it would be a war fought on my terms, with intelligence, not with emotion. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I was already dressed and ready to go. My first stop was the office of an attorney, Mr. Weber, a man I had met years ago when I was handling my husband's will. Unlike the slick, predatory Mr. Fisher, Mr. Weber had an impeccable reputation. He specialized in elder law, in protecting the rights of senior citizens from predators, even when those predators were their own family. Mrs. Richter, he told me grimly after I had explained the entire situation, his hands steepled on his large oak desk. What your children attempted to do yesterday is more common than you think. It has a name. It's called elder financial abuse, and in many states, it is a federal crime. The fact that they entered your house without your explicit permission and reviewed your private documents also constitutes a violation of your privacy and, potentially, trespassing. His words both calmed and worried me. They calmed me because they confirmed that I was not crazy, that what had happened was truly abusive and wrong. They worried me because I realized the situation was far more serious than I had even imagined. We have to document everything, Mr. Weber continued, his voice calm and authoritative. Every transfer, every gift, every time they pressured you for money. We will also immediately draft a new will and a new power of attorney, naming your sister or a trusted professional to protect your assets from any future manipulation attempts. We spent the next 3 hours going through my financial records. Mr. Weber let out a low whistle when he saw the total sum, the $33,400 in just 3 years. Mrs. Richter, he said, looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and professional outrage. With this money, you could have lived very comfortably. You could have traveled, enjoyed your retirement. Instead, you completely finance the lives of two adults who didn't even have the basic decency to invite you to their wedding. When I left Mr. Weber's office, I had a complete step-by-step plan. First, I would change every single lock on my house. Second, I would install a state-of-the-art security system, complete with cameras. Third, I would open a new bank account at an entirely different bank where they had no contacts and no history. And fourth, and most importantly, I would start living the life I had postponed for years. My next stop was the hardware store. The owner, a man named Mr. Summer, had known me for years. He always greeted me with a friendly smile, often asking, "What project is Max working on now?" Because I was always buying things to fix up their apartment. This time was different. "Mrs. Richter, what brings you here today?" "Another emergency with your son?" he asked, with the easy familiarity of a person who had silently witnessed my wasted generosity for years. "No, Mr. Summer," I said, my voice bright and clear. "This time it's for my own house. I need to change all the locks, and I want them to be of the absolute best quality." He looked at me, a flash of surprise in his eyes, but he asked no questions. While I was choosing the deadbolts, his son, Ethan, who ran a side business installing security systems, came by. It felt like Providence in action. "Ethan," I told him, "I also need to install surveillance cameras. The complete system. The price is not an issue." While they were preparing everything for the installation the very next day, I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. It was Lena, calling from someone else's phone because I had blocked her number after the confrontation. "Renate, it's Lena. Please don't hang up. We need to talk like civilized adults." "Speak," I said, my voice dry and devoid of warmth. "Listen," she began, her tone a careful mix of contrition and persuasion. "I understand you're upset about the wedding. It was a mistake. Max and I have talked about it, and we want to make it up to you. How about we have a special dinner just for you to celebrate our wedding with you? We can do it at your house. We can cook together just like we used to." The manipulation in her words was so transparent, so insultingly obvious, that I almost had to laugh. "Lena," I interrupted her performance. "How much rent do you owe exactly?" The silence on the other end of the line was my answer. I had hit a nerve. Well, it's 2 months now," she finally admitted, her voice small. $1,000 total. "But I'm not just calling for that, Renate. We really, truly miss you in our lives. Do you miss me, or do you miss my money?" I asked, the question as direct as a surgeon's scalpel. There was a pause. "Both," she replied, with a surprising and perhaps desperate honesty. "Renate, I won't lie to you. Yes, we need your financial help. But we love you too. You're important to us." "If I'm so important," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "why wasn't I important enough to be at your wedding? Why am I not important enough for you to call me just to ask how I am doing, without a financial request attached?" "When was the last time you called me just to say hello, Lena?" Another silence. We both knew the answer. "Never." "Lena, I am only going to explain this to you one time," I said, articulating each word with precision. "For 3 years, you have treated me like an ATM with feelings. You used me. You ignored me. You humiliated me. And finally, you insulted me in the worst possible way. Now that the money is running out, you suddenly discover that you love me. The timing is a little too convenient, don't you think? Renate, please." She began to cry, the practiced sobs starting up again. I cut her off. "There is no please. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't special enough to be at your wedding. Now, I am making mine." I hung up the phone and turned it off completely. I didn't want any more interruptions on my day of liberation. That afternoon, I went to the beauty salon I hadn't set foot in for over a year. I always canceled my appointments at the last minute because Max or Lena would call with some urgent need, some manufactured crisis, and the money I had set aside for myself would become an emergency fund for them. "Mrs. Richter," my favorite hairstylist, Cynthia, called out, her face lighting up with a genuine smile. "What a wonderful surprise. I thought you had forgotten about us." "I didn't forget you, Cynthia," I said, settling into the comfortable chair. "I just forgot that I also deserve to be pampered." I treated myself to the full experience, a new cut, a rich new color, a manicure, a pedicure. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I spent money on myself without a single pang of guilt. While Cynthia worked her magic on my hair, she told me about her life, her children, her dreams. It was refreshing, having a normal conversation that didn't revolve around Max and Lena's endless needs and wants. "You look beautiful, Mrs. Richter," she said when she was done, holding up a mirror. "But more than that, you look free. Did something good happen?" I looked at my reflection. The woman staring back at me looked 10 years younger. Her eyes were bright, her smile was genuine. "Yes, Cynthia," I said. "Something wonderful happened. I finally learned how to say no. When I got home that afternoon, there was a car I didn't recognize parked in front of my neighbor's house. As I got out of my own car, an older woman who was sitting on the steps of her porch stood up. "Mrs. Richter?" she asked, her voice friendly. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Eleanor Brooks. I live next door. We've been neighbors for years, but we've never really had a chance to talk. I heard very loud voices coming from your house yesterday and I got worried. I wanted to make sure everything was okay." Her sincere concern, from a woman who was practically a stranger, touched me to my very core. Here was a neighbor who showed more interest in my well-being than my own son. "Come in, Mrs. Brooks," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "Please, call me Renate. I'll make you a coffee, and I will tell you a story that you are not going to believe." While the coffee brewed, I told her everything, the whole sordid, painful story. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her kind eyes full of empathy, nodding occasionally. And when I finished my story, her eyes were filled with tears. "Renate," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You did the right thing, the brave thing. I went through something very similar with my own daughter about 5 years ago. I also thought it was my duty to finance her adult life. I also believed she wouldn't love me if I didn't give her money." "What happened?" I asked, leaning forward, hungry for her wisdom. "I cut off the money. When I realized she only called me when she needed something. At first, it was terrible. She threatened me, emotionally blackmailed me, tried to make me feel guilty. But after about 6 months of silence, my daughter called me to genuinely apologize. She had gotten a second job. She had learned to budget. She had grown up. Now we have a real relationship, based on love, not on money." Her words were a balm to my wounded soul. They gave me hope and confirmed that I had made the right decision. "Do you think Max and Lena will ever understand?" I asked, a flicker of my old maternal hope still burning. "Maybe yes, maybe no," she answered honestly, placing a comforting hand on my arm. "But that is no longer your responsibility, Renate. Your responsibility now is to live your own life." That night, for the first time in 3 years, I went to bed without a single worry about whether Max and Lena had money for rent, for food, for their whims. I went to bed thinking about myself, my plans, my future, and I slept better than I had in years. The next day, Ethan and Mr. Summer arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning to change the locks and install the security system. While they worked, my phone, which I had turned back on, didn't stop ringing from unknown numbers. Lena was still trying to contact me from different phones, but I had developed a new skill, the art of completely ignoring calls that did not serve my peace. "Mrs. Richter," Ethan said as he showed me how to use the new camera system on my phone. "This system will give you absolute peace of mind. You can see from your phone who is coming to your house, even when you're not here, and if someone tries to break in without permission, an alert is automatically sent to the police." The irony was not lost on me. I was installing a security system to protect myself from my own son, but it didn't hurt as much as it used to. It was simply a practical, necessary measure to maintain my newfound peace. While they were finishing up, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister Diana in Chicago. We had lost touch, not because of any argument, but because every time we talked, I would invariably end up bragging about Max and Lena's supposed successes, about how much money I was giving them, about how proud I was to be able to help them. I now realized, with a cringe of embarrassment, that our conversations had become little more than financial reports disguised as family news. "Renate?" Diana answered, her voice full of surprise. "Sister, how are you? We haven't spoken in months." "I'm good, Diana. Better than good. I'm calling you to tell you that I have finally come to my senses. I told her the whole story, from the very beginning. The secret wedding, the humiliation, the visit with the lawyer, my decision to cut off all funding. Diana listened to me in complete silence, and when I was done, her answer stunned me. "Renate, sister, it's about time." Every single time we spoke, it broke my heart to hear you bragging about how much money you gave them, as if love could be measured in dollars. I wanted to tell you something so many times, but I didn't know how. "What did you want to tell me?" I asked, my heart sinking. "That Max never, ever spoke lovingly about you when I saw him at family gatherings. It was always, 'My mom helped me with this,' or 'My mom bought me that,' but never, 'I miss my mom,' or 'I love my mom.' It was as if you were a service provider, not a person." Her words hurt, but it was a necessary pain. Like when a doctor has to clean an infected wound. It hurts, but it's part of the healing. "You know what else I noticed?" Diana continued, her voice gentle but firm. "Lena always spoke about you in the future tense. When Renate is no longer here, we can remodel her house, or, when we inherit, we will invest in a business. As if they were just waiting for you to die to really start living." This revelation hit me like another bucket of ice water. They didn't just see me as an ATM, they saw me as a temporary obstacle. An obstacle between them and their real prize. My money, my house, my entire life's work. While I was sacrificing my own peace to make them happy, they were busy planning their future without me in it. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. On my new security camera feed, I saw it was Eleanor, holding a mug in her hands. I opened the door, and she handed me a freshly brewed coffee. "I thought you might need some company after everything you told me yesterday," she said with that sincere, kind smile I had already come to appreciate. We sat in my living room, and Eleanor told me more details from her own experience. "My daughter said the exact same things to me that Lena says to you. You're like a second mom to me. We're so special to you. Everything will be ours one day anyway." Those are rehearsed phrases, Renate. They learned them from the Emotional Manipulation Handbook. "Do you think such a handbook actually exists?" I asked, half joking. "Not officially," she chuckled. "But it seems they all read from the same book. Chapter 1 is, Make her feel indispensable. Chapter 2 is, Create constant financial emergencies. And Chapter 3 is, When she resists, question her mental health." We laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. It was both funny and tragic to recognize such predictable, predatory patterns in our own children's behavior. "Did you ever feel guilty?" I asked her, my voice quiet. "For cutting off the money?" "Every single day for the first 3 months," she answered with raw honesty. But then, I started to see the results. My daughter had to get a second job. Her husband stopped playing golf every weekend and started looking for extra work. They learned to live within their means. And more importantly, they learned that I was a person, not a resource. Her story was my roadmap. Her strength was my inspiration. That afternoon, I decided to do something I had postponed for years. I drove to the cemetery to visit my husband's grave. I always made excuses not to go, because Max or Lena needed something urgent, or because the taxi fare was better invested in one of their emergencies. The cemetery was quiet and beautiful, a peaceful haven. Robert's grave looked a bit neglected, and a pang of guilt shot through me. I hadn't been there to clean it in months. I sat on the grass next to his headstone and I talked to him, as if he were sitting right there beside me. "Robert, my love," I whispered, my hand resting on the cool stone. "I think I lost myself for a while. After you left, I put all my energy, all my love into Max. I wanted to be the best mother in the world, to make up for the fact that he was growing up without a father. But I think, in the process, I forgot to be myself. Our son, he has become someone I don't recognize. Or maybe he was always like this, and I just didn't want to see it. The money you left for me, the money for my peace, I spent it taking care of them. But not anymore, my love. I have learned." I cleaned his grave, replaced the withered flowers with a bouquet of fresh, vibrant roses, and stayed there for another hour, simply enjoying the peace. For the first time in years, I was not in a hurry to get home to solve a crisis for Max and Lena. When I got home, there were cars parked in front of my door again. My heart leaped into my throat, but this time, I was prepared. The cameras showed me that it was Max, Lena, and 2 other people I didn't recognize. Everyone seemed agitated, talking to each other and pointing at my house. I didn't get out of my car. Instead, I called Mr. Weber, my lawyer. Mr. Weber, they are at my house again. This time, they've brought more people. What should I do? Do not get out of the car, Renate, he said, his voice calm and commanding. I will be there right away. And I am calling the police. After our conversation yesterday, I filed for a temporary restraining order. They are not legally allowed to be on your property. Minutes later, which felt like an eternity, Mr. Weber's car pulled up, followed by 2 police patrol cars. I watched as the officers talked to Max and Lena. I saw my son gesticulating angrily. I saw Lena crying again, but this time, her tears did not move me in the slightest. One of the officers approached my car. Ma'am, you can get out safely now. Your visitors are going to leave immediately. As I got out of the car, Max shouted at me from the street, his voice filled with rage. Mom, this is ridiculous. We're your family. You can't call the police on your own son. I looked at him, standing there on the other side of the lawn, a stranger in the body of my child. Max, I replied, my voice carrying clearly in the quiet afternoon air, my calm infuriating him even more. Family doesn't threaten their mother with lawsuits for mental incompetence. Family doesn't break into people's homes without permission. Family doesn't treat their mothers like ATMs. Lena screamed from across the street, her voice shrill and ugly. You're going to pay us everything you owe us. We have bills you co-signed for. You can't just abandon us like this. Mr. Weber stepped forward, a bulwark of legal authority. Mrs. Schuster, he said, his voice booming. Any future communication must be through my office. And I suggest you consult with an attorney before making threats of collection, because my client has full and complete documentation of all the voluntary payments she made to you for 3 years. A judge might be very interested to see that. I watched them drive away in their cars, defeated but not repentant. I knew this wasn't over. But for the first time in this whole ordeal, I felt confident. I had professional help. I had emotional support from Eleanor. And most importantly, I had mental clarity about what was right and what was wrong. That night, Eleanor invited me to her house for dinner. I met her daughter, the one she had told me about, who was visiting for the weekend. And I was able to see with my own eyes what a healthy, respectful family relationship looked like. They spoke to each other with kindness. They asked about each other's lives with genuine interest. They laughed together. The daughter did not ask for money a single time the entire evening. I wanted that with Max, too, I confessed to Eleanor after her daughter had left. And maybe, one day, you'll get it, she replied gently. But first, he has to learn that you are a person who deserves respect, not just a source of income. The next few weeks were strangely peaceful. The surveillance cameras showed me that Max and Lena were driving past my house several times a day, sometimes slowly, as if casing the joint. Sometimes they would park down the street for a few minutes, just watching. It was as if they were studying my routine, looking for a weakness, planning their next move. Mr. Weber had advised me to document every single one of these visits, so I kept a detailed log with the date, the time, and the duration. Their persistence will work in our favor, he had said during one of our calls. Every time they show up after being told not to approach, it strengthens our case for a permanent restraining order. On a Friday morning, I was calmly having breakfast and reading the newspaper when the doorbell rang. The cameras showed me a very well-dressed young woman with a folder in her hands and a professional, practiced smile. I didn't recognize her, but something about her rigid posture told me this was not a social visit. "Good morning, Mrs. Renate Richter," she said as I opened the door, just a crack. "I am a social investigator from the Office of Senior Services. We have received a report that you may be in an at-risk situation, and we need to conduct a wellness check." My blood ran cold. They had escalated the situation. It was no longer just threats from private lawyers. Now they had involved the government. They were trying to use the very system designed to protect people like me as a weapon against me. "Can I see your identification, please?" I asked, my voice betraying none of the fear that was coursing through my veins. "Of course," she said, showing me an official ID that looked genuine. "I am social worker Mrs. Schmidt. May I come in and talk to you for a few minutes?" I let her in, knowing that a refusal would have been far worse for my case. Mrs. Schmidt sat down primly on the edge of my sofa and took a form out of her folder. "Mrs. Richter," she began, her tone a mixture of forced sympathy and bureaucratic detachment. "We have received reports that you have shown significant and sudden changes in your financial behavior, that you have cut off all communication with your family, and that you have shown signs of paranoia by installing what has been described as an unnecessary security system. We were also told that you have refused medical and legal help from your loved ones." Every word, every phrase had been carefully chosen, meticulously crafted to make me sound like a mentally disturbed old woman on the verge of a complete breakdown. I could practically hear Lena's voice whispering the words into the report. She had always been skilled at manipulating words to get what she wanted. "Miss Schmidt," I said, with all the dignity I could muster, "I would like to call my lawyer before I answer any of your questions." "Ma'am, this is not a legal interrogation," she said, her smile tightening slightly. "It's just a wellness check. If you have nothing to hide, it should not be a problem to speak with me." The phrase, "if you have nothing to hide," infuriated me. It was the same twisted logic that abusers and tyrants use to justify their invasions of privacy. If you're innocent, you shouldn't complain about your rights being violated. "Miss," I said, my voice firm, "I am calling my lawyer. You can wait here, or you can come back another day with him present. But I will not answer any questions without legal representation." I called Mr. Weber, and he was there within 20 minutes. When he walked in and saw the social worker, his expression hardened. "Miss Schmidt," he said after checking her ID with a thoroughness that clearly unnerved her, "I hope you have a court order to be here, because my client is under my legal representation, and any unauthorized investigation constitutes harassment." "Sir, Mrs." Schmidt replied, her confidence visibly wavering. "We have reports from concerned family members about the lady's well-being. It is our duty to investigate." "What family?" Mr. Weber asked, his voice dripping with dry sarcasm. "The same family that tried to coerce her into signing over a power of attorney without legal representation? The same family that broke into her house without permission and went through her private documents? The same family that excluded her from important life events while simultaneously living off her retirement savings?" Mr. Weber took a thick folder from his briefcase and placed it on the coffee table with a thud. "Here, I have complete documentation of the financial and emotional abuse my client has been subjected to. $33,400 that were withdrawn from her accounts in 3 years. Systematic social exclusion. Emotional blackmail. If someone needs to be investigated here, Miss Schmidt, it is not my client, Mrs." Schmidt reviewed the documents, her eyes widening with growing discomfort. It was obvious that the information she had been given did not match the reality she had in front of her. "Mrs. Richter," she said finally, turning to me, her tone much more respectful, "can you explain to me why you so abruptly stopped the financial support for your son?" "Because I finally discovered they were using me," I replied simply. "Because I realized that to them, I wasn't a mother, but a bank account. Because I was tired of financing the lives of people who saw me as an obstacle to their inheritance. But don't you feel it is your responsibility to help your family?" The question, though professionally phrased, outraged me. "Miss Schmidt, my responsibility as a mother was to raise my son until he was 18 years old, to educate him, to feed him, and to give him the tools to be an independent, self-sufficient adult. My son is 35 years old, married, and perfectly capable of supporting himself. Financing his adult life is not my responsibility. It is my choice, and I have chosen not to do so anymore." Mr. Weber interjected. "Miss Schmidt, would you consider it normal for a 35-year-old adult to be unable to pay his own rent without the financial assistance of his 71-year-old mother?" Mrs. Schmidt did not answer right away. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she reevaluated the entire situation. "Mrs. Richter," she asked after a long moment, "do you manage your own finances completely? I can show you my bank statements, my investment portfolio, my tax payments. Everything is current and in perfect order. Do you live independently? As you can see, I keep my house clean. I take care of myself physically. I drive my own car. I have healthy social relationships with my neighbors and friends. Do you take any medication? Just vitamins and an occasional aspirin for a headache. I have no medical conditions that require regular medication." Mr. Weber added, "My client has just undergone a series of extensive medical exams as part of our legal process. She is in perfect mental and physical condition. We have the reports right here. Mrs. Schmidt closed her folder with a snap. Mrs. Richter, based on this conversation and the documentation I have reviewed, I see no indication whatsoever that you are at risk or in need of any intervention. I will be closing this case. I apologize for the intrusion. After she left, Mr. Weber and I remained silent for a few minutes. Renate, he said finally, his voice grave, this is going to continue to escalate. Max and Lena are spending money they don't have to hire professionals to try to have you declared incompetent. Does that mean they are desperate? It means exactly that. They are cornered animals, and they are becoming more dangerous. What else can they possibly do? They can file a formal lawsuit for incompetence in family court. It's an expensive and difficult process to win. But if they find a sympathetic judge and a psychiatrist willing to testify in their favor, they could get a guardian assigned. The thought terrified me. A stranger, or worse, Max, could be given legal control over my money, my home, my life. That evening, Eleanor came to visit with a surprise. She had invited her friends from the local garden club to meet me. Renate, she introduced me. These are my friends Cynthia, whom you already know from the salon, Maria, Carmen, and Alfreda. We have all, in one way or another, been through similar situations with abusive or manipulative family members. We spent the evening sharing stories. Maria had had to set boundaries with a brother who constantly asked her for money. Carmen had cut off her relationship with a daughter who only visited when she needed something. Alfreda had had to change her will after she found out her grandchildren were openly referring to her as their retirement plan. What hurts me the most, I confess to this circle of wise, strong women, is not losing the money I gave them. It's realizing that I never had the love I thought I had. Renate, Alfreda said, her voice filled with the wisdom of her 80 years, as she took my hands in hers. True love cannot be bought or sold. If you had to pay for it, it was never real. Her words were a balm to my wounded soul. She was right. I had bought attention. I had financed an illusion. I had not earned love. You know what I've discovered? I said to my new friends, a real smile touching my lips, that the loneliness of being surrounded by people who don't love you is far worse than the solitude of being on your own. At least now, when I am alone, I am in good company. Everyone laughed, and we toasted with our cups of tea to our newfound wisdom, to our hard-won freedom. The war had officially begun, but for the first time, I felt I was not fighting it alone. I was ready. The trial came 3 weeks later. Those 3 weeks were a blur of legal preparations, of depositions, of sleepless nights. I woke up early on the day of the hearing, put on my best black suit, a suit I had bought for my husband's funeral, and looked at myself in the mirror with a determination I had never felt before. Today, not only my mental capacity would be judged, my dignity as a person, my right to live free from abuse, my value beyond my bank account, all of it would be on trial. Mr. Weber came at 7 in the morning to go over our strategy one last time. Renate, remember, he said, his voice a reassuring anchor in the storm of my anxiety. The burden of proof is on them. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you are incompetent. We just have to show that you are not. And what if the judge is already biased against me? Judge Miller has a reputation for being fair but tough. I have researched his past cases, and he does not automatically favor families. In fact, he is known for being fiercely protective of the rights of the elderly. We arrived at the courthouse at 9 o'clock in the morning. In the hallway, I saw them. Max was in a new, expensive suit that he had probably bought for the occasion with a credit card I had co-signed for. Lena was dressed in somber black, as if she were attending a funeral, and perhaps she was. The funeral of our family relationship. When our eyes met, Max immediately looked away, unable to meet my gaze. But Lena held my stare, her eyes filled with a cold, reptilian hatred that confirmed, once and for all, that for her, this was just a business transaction. Their lawyer was an older, elegant man with the kind of smug confidence that comes from winning similar cases before. When he began his opening statement, his strategy was clear: to portray me as a confused, paranoid old woman who had been manipulated by strangers to alienate me from my loving, concerned family. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with false solemnity. "Mrs. Renate Richter has shown a clear and alarming mental decline in recent months. She has cut off all financial support for her only son and his family without a rational explanation. She has installed unnecessary and elaborate security systems due to a burgeoning paranoia, and she has isolated herself from her loved ones, falling under the influence of new acquaintances and opportunistic lawyers who are obviously taking advantage of her vulnerable situation. Every word had been carefully chosen to twist my self-empowerment into a symptom of dementia, my freedom into a sign of external manipulation. Then, they called their witnesses. Lena was the first to testify, and her performance was worthy of an Oscar. She cried as she described how I had completely changed, how I had become hostile and paranoid, how I had isolated myself from the family that loved her so much. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "Renate has always been like a second mother to me. Seeing her mental decline has been utterly devastating for us. We just want to help her. We just want her to get the care she needs." Lies. All of it. A disgusting performance of lies, wrapped in convincing tears. When Mr. Weber began his cross-examination, the cracks in her story began to appear. "Mrs. Schuster," he began, his voice polite but firm, "can you tell the court when was the last time you called my client without asking for money?" Lena stammered. "Well, we always talked about many things. Can you give me a specific date?" I don't remember exact dates. Is it true, mister?" Weber continued, "that you and your husband got married without inviting my client, the mother of the groom?" "It was a very small, intimate ceremony," she said, her face flushing. "Is it true that when my client asked about the wedding, you told her that you had only invited special people?" Lena's face turned a deep, blotchy red. Those words, they were taken out of context. "What, mister?" Weber asked, pausing for effect. "Would be the right context to tell your mother-in-law, the woman who paid your rent for 3 years, that she is not a special person?" She couldn't answer. She just sat there, exposed and defeated. Max was next. Seeing him on the witness stand, raising his right hand and swearing to tell the truth while preparing to lie about my mental health was one of the most painful moments of my entire life. This was the boy I had raised alone. The boy I had dedicated my entire life to. "My mom has always been very generous with us," he testified, his eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. "But lately, she has become erratic and irrational. We believe she is being manipulated by people who are taking advantage of her." When Mr. Weber cross-examined him, the mask fell completely. "Mr. Richter, how much money, approximately, have you and your wife received from your mother in the last 3 years?" I don't know the exact amount. Does $33,400 sound about right?" Max shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Maybe. She's always been generous." "And in those 3 years, Mr. Richter, how many times have you visited your mother without asking her for money?" The silence in the courtroom was deafening. "Is it true that you and your wife entered my client's house without her permission and went through her private personal documents?" "We were worried about her," he mumbled. "Is it true that you brought a lawyer to her home to pressure her into signing a power of attorney? We just wanted to help her manage her finances. Do you, Mr. Weber asked, his voice booming, "at 35 years old, need the help of your 71-year-old mother to pay your own rent?" Max couldn't answer with any semblance of dignity. His entire case, his entire pretense of concern, had crumbled under the weight of his own greed. Then, it was our turn. Mr. Weber first called Dr. Moore, the psychiatrist, who testified about my excellent mental state and presented the flawless results of my cognitive tests. He called Mr. Klein, the bank manager, who testified about my competence in handling my financial affairs. He called Eleanor and my friends from the garden club, who all testified about my clarity, my newfound vitality, and my ability to maintain healthy, positive social relationships. Finally, it was my turn to testify. I stood up with a dignity I didn't know I possessed and walked to the witness stand, feeling the weight of 71 years of experience, of wisdom gained through pain, of strength discovered in adversity. Mr. Weber guided me through my testimony, letting me tell my whole story in my own words. The $33,400 spent in 3 years. The humiliation of being excluded from the wedding, the constant emotional manipulation, the violation of my privacy, the legal threats. "Mrs. Richter," Mr. Weber finally asked, his voice gentle, Why did you decide to stop the financial support for your son and daughter-in-law? I looked across the courtroom, past the lawyers, past the judge, and directly at my son. Because I finally understood, I replied, my voice clear and loud, resonating with the truth, that what I was getting from them was not love. It was a commercial transaction disguised as a family relationship. My money was welcome in their lives, but I, as a person, was not. Do you regret your decision? I only regret, I said, my voice unwavering, that it took me so long to make it. In his closing argument, Max's lawyer insisted that I was a victim of external manipulation. Mr. Weber's rebuttal was devastating. Your Honor, what we have seen here today is not the case of an incompetent old woman. It is the case of a strong, intelligent woman who has finally found the strength to free herself from years of financial and emotional abuse. The plaintiffs have presented no real medical evidence of mental incompetence. What they have presented is their frustration, their anger, because their source of income has decided to exercise her legal and moral right to protect her own resources. This is not a case about concern. This is a case about greed. Judge Miller retired to deliberate for 2 hours that felt like 2 years. When he returned, his expression was serious, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom before finally settling on me. After reviewing all the evidence presented, he began, his voice deep and authoritative. It is obvious to this court that Mrs. Renate Richter is in full and complete possession of her mental faculties. Professional psychiatric evaluations confirm her cognitive competence beyond any doubt. Her financial decisions, as painful as they may be for her family, are completely rational and well within her rights as a free and autonomous citizen. My heart began to beat faster, a wild bird in my chest. Furthermore, the judge continued, his voice hardening as he looked towards Max and Lena, the evidence strongly suggests that this lawsuit was not motivated by genuine concern for Mrs. Richter's well-being, but rather by financial interest. The court finds this action to be frivolous and borderline malicious. The court therefore completely and unequivocally denies the request for guardianship. I had won. I had not only won the lawsuit, I had won my freedom. I had won my dignity. I had won my right to live free from the abuse of those who were supposed to love me most. When we left the courthouse, I saw Max and Lena talking angrily with their lawyer. Lena gave me one last look of pure, unadulterated hatred before she walked away. Max looked at me one last time, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of shame, of regret. But it was already too late. The damage was done. The bridge was burned. That night, Eleanor organized a celebration at my house with all our friends. We toasted to justice, to freedom, to the sisterhood of strong women who support each other. Renate, Alfreda told me, her old eyes sparkling. Today, you didn't just win a trial, you won back your life. And she was right. For the first time in so many years, the future was completely, entirely mine. I could travel, I could love, I could create. I could live without fear, without guilt, without manipulation. 3 months later, I sold my house, the house filled with too many ghosts, and moved to a beautiful sunlit apartment near the city center. I donated half of the money from the sale to organizations that protect the elderly from family abuse. With the other half, I began to live the life I had always wanted. I traveled through Europe, seeing the art I had only ever dreamed of. I took painting classes again. I joined volunteer groups, finding joy in helping others. I never heard from Max and Lena again. I heard through the grapevine that they had to move to a smaller apartment in a less desirable part of town, and that Lena had to find a job for the first time in years. Perhaps adversity would teach them what my generosity never could, the value of honest work and the dignity of independence. Some nights, when I look at the stars from my new balcony, I think about the woman I was just a year ago, fearful, manipulated, believing that I had to buy love. That woman is gone, and in her place, a new woman has been born. A woman who has understood a fundamental, life-altering truth. True love never has a price tag, and freedom, true freedom, is never too expensive. My name is Renate. I am 72 years old, and I have finally learned that the most important person I have to love and protect is myself.